You know that feeling you got when you look at your retirement account? That little knot in your stomach? Because the financial media, they just love to throw these huge, kind of scary numbers at us, right? 1 million, 2 million, maybe even more. And it's so easy to feel like you're never, ever going to get there. But here's the thing. What if the math that everyone is using is just fundamentally incomplete? So do you really need $2 million to retire? Let's dive right into that. A big part of the retirement industry is kind of built on making you just a little bit anxious, right? It keeps you clicking, it keeps you watching. But the actual research, the real data that hardly ever makes the headlines, it tells a completely different story. A story that might just suggest your financial freedom is way closer than you think. Okay, so here's the deal. The number one rule of retirement, the one you hear about all the time, it's technically correct, sure, but it's also fundamentally incomplete. And here's why. It's built on this foundation of absolute worst-case scenario assumptions. Assumptions that just don't match how real people, like you and me, actually live and spend our money. And if we just change one of those assumptions, just one, the entire picture, it just completely transforms. All right, Section 1, the retirement number anxiety. Before we get to the solution, we've got to understand the problem. So let's take a look at where that big, scary, intimidating number even comes from in the first place. Okay, to make this real, let's invent a couple. Let's say they're looking to retire at age 60, and their goal, their dream, is to live on $90,000 a year. Now they know that when they hit 67, Social Security is going to kick in, and that'll provide about $60,000 a year for them. So the big question is, how much do they need in their nest egg on day one, the day they walk out of the office for the last time, to make this whole plan work? Okay, Section 2, cracking the 4% rule. The answer to that big question almost always comes from one place. The legendary, the famous 4% rule. So let's break down exactly what it is and, maybe even more importantly, what it assumes about you. So back in 1994, a financial advisor named Bill Bengen did this absolutely revolutionary research. He basically took a simple withdrawal strategy and stress tested it against the absolute worst times in market history. We're talking the Great Depression, the crazy stagflation of the 70s, all of it. And what he found was incredible. A 4% withdrawal in your first year of retirement, and then you just adjust that dollar amount for inflation every year after, that portfolio never ran out of money over a 30-year period. It was, a total game changer for financial planning. But here's the catch, and this is really the key to everything. To be bulletproof, to survive those absolute worst-case scenarios, the rule has to make some really rigid assumptions. It basically assumes you're a robot. It assumes you will never, ever adjust your spending, not even by a little bit, even if the market completely crashes. And get this, it sizes your entire portfolio based on your single most expensive year of retirement, that year right before Social Security kicks in, and it just assumes you're going to need that same amount forever. And boom, there's the result. For our couple to get that $90,000 a year following the strict 4% rule, they need $2.25 million. That is the number. That's the number that causes all the anxiety. That's the number that makes people look at their 401k and think, I'm going to have to work forever. So, Section 3, the flexibility factor. But what if? What if we just introduce one simple, common sense assumption? What if we assume that retirees are not, in fact, robots? Let's see how that one little change just transforms everything. Think about it. It turns out that when the markets get rough, people, they behave like actual humans. We naturally tighten our belts a little, right? Maybe you put off that big vacation for a year, or you eat out a little less. And then, when the markets bounce back, our spending bounces back too. This isn't some radical new idea. It's just reality. And the moment you acknowledge that reality in the math, everything changes. And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. Just look at the research from huge institutions like Morningstar. If you have a totally rigid, fixed spending plan, they recommend something like a 3.9% withdrawal rate. But if you have a flexible plan, that number jumps to 5.7%. That is a nearly 50% increase in how much money you can safely take out of your portfolio just by acknowledging that you're going to behave like a normal human being. All right, Section 4, a tale of two plans. So now, let's put these two approaches head to head. It's the old, rigid way versus a new, much more realistic plan for our couple. So the old plan, it's kind of like a one-size-fits-all solution. It uses one rigid rule to try and solve this entire 30-plus year problem. But the new plan is smarter. It recognizes that retirement isn't just one long, unchanging block of time. It has at least two very, very distinct phases. There are the years before Social Security, and then there are the years after. Okay, first, let's just remember our starting point. The old plan. The rigid plan. It says our couple needs this massive, intimidating number, $2.25 million. All right, now let's build the new plan, step by step. First, we're going to fund what we'll call the bridge. This is just the money to cover their full $90,000 annual spend for those 7 years before Social Security starts. That's a finite problem with a clear end date, and it requires about $588,000. Okay, step 2. We fund the core. This is the money needed to cover that smaller $30,000 income gap for the rest of their lives. And because we're using a more flexible withdrawal rate, say around 5.5%, that only requires a portfolio of about $355,000. So, when you add those two pieces together, the bridge fund and the core fund, the grand total our couple needs on the day they retire at age 60 is just $943,000. And just look at that. This is the aha moment right here. The old plan, $2.25 million. The new plan, under $1 million. We're funding the exact same lifestyle, $90,000 a year for life, with less than half the money. That's over $1.2 million less. This isn't some kind of magic trick. It's just smarter math. So, Section 5, your real retirement math. Okay, so what does all of this actually mean for you? Let's kind of zoom out now and talk about the key principles that you can apply to your own situation. And I really want to stress this point. This isn't some risky, out-there strategy. It's really just common sense. It's about segmenting your retirement into its actual phases and then planning based on how tons of research shows people really behave, not how some rigid worst-case scenario spreadsheet assumes they'll behave. Okay, now let's just flip this whole thing around for a second. What if our couple did save that full $2.25 million? What if they hit the number the old rule told them to? Well, with this new plan, they only actually need about 42% of that money. The other 58%, that's over $1.3 million, is pure surplus. I mean, think about what that means. That could be retiring years, maybe a decade earlier. It could be leaving a massive legacy to their kids, or just living a much, much more lavish lifestyle. And if you're still feeling a little skeptical, listen to this. The quote on your screen is from Bill Bengen himself, the guy who created the 4% rule in the first place. He said that people who are still planning to only take out 4% are cheating themselves a little bit. So even the creator of the original rule now thinks it's just too conservative for how things work today. And you know what? There's even more evidence that backs this up. There's this fascinating research on what's called the retirement spending smile. It shows that our real spending, even after you account for inflation, doesn't just stay flat forever. It's actually highest in those early, active, go-go years of your 60s when you're traveling and doing everything. Then it naturally declines through your 70s, the slow-go years. And by your 80s, it's often way lower. The old 4% rule just assumes you'll be spending like a 65-year-old forever, but, well, reality just shows that's not what happens. So the final takeaway here is pretty simple, but it's really powerful. By just challenging these old assumptions, by planning for retirement the way it actually works, not the way some oversimplified model says it should work, you might just find that your freedom is so much closer than you've been led to believe. The research on this is really clear. The only question left is, are you ready to see the math for yourself?